So I'm here to talk to you guys about hope. And I recognize there's irony in talking about hope a couple days after Donald Trump put Dr. Phil and Ben Carson on a religious liberty commission that defined religious liberty, including the right of government to have religious imagery in governmental displays and the right of teachers to provide religious instruction in schools under the First Amendment. And where he said at the signing of the proclamation to create this commission that we just need to forget about the separation of church and state for a little while.
For one day.
Well, he said that about being a dictator too. He said one day, and then I think we understand how long that's going to last.
Well, he's got used to it. He liked it.
So I recognize that there's irony in coming together to talk about hope. And yet, I also think that if you want to know why there's hope for our movement, the humanist movement to grow, and the humanist movement to challenge the autocratic slide of this country, then that's what we're going to talk about. We're humanists, so we believe in data. And so we're going to go into some of the data that shows that humanism is poised to grow and provide a strong counterweight to authoritarianism. And we're going to talk about the work of the AHA, what it's doing, what those of you who are AHA members, because I know there are many of you in this room, are funding our amazing team of 17 to do. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we're really excited for going forward. But I know that we've got groups in here from all sorts of movements. We have people who are humanists, atheists, skeptics. I am often put in the position of talking about what is a humanist, what is humanism. And I often, if I have 5 seconds, I say humanism is for people who believe in the golden rule but not in God. And if I have a few more seconds, I say humanism is for everyone who believes science tells us what's real and compassion tells us what's right. And if I have a little longer, I say humanism is a belief in people. It's a belief in human dignity, the idea that we all have equal worth without needing to be saved or redeemed. It's a belief in human potential, that there's no problem we can't solve and no truth we can't uncover as long as we live in societies that protect the right to think freely. And it's a belief in human responsibility, that our highest good, our highest moral obligation is not adherence to abstractions or myths, but our responsibilities to heal each other's pain and support each other's promise right now in the real world. So that's what humanism is. It believes that people are special and worthy and worth fighting for, but that our worthiness and our specialness comes not from an immortal soul or an intelligently designed body, but from consciousness, from our ability to imagine better futures for ourselves and our fellow humans from the infinite canvas of a free mind. And so when I tell that to people, I hear a lot of people say, oh shit, well I didn't know I was a humanist. We've done some of the modeling of the publicly available data about belief systems in America. We believe there are 45 million sleeping humanists in America who don't know it yet. 45 million people who are broadly secular, broadly progressive, and who are looking for something to give more depth and meaning and purpose to their lives and bring them together right now in this moment where we have to, fight back against the fascistic slide of our country, who want to be part of a legacy and a tradition. Well, if you think about it, the belief system of many of America's greatest rebels throughout our nation's history has been humanism. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we're inviting them in, but first, why the hell would somebody want a job like this? I don't know if you guys have spent time around humanists before. My fiance is Jewish. She's a secular Jew, so we have an interfaithless marriage. And there's an old joke, many of you have heard it, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Right. Now with humanists, the joke is 2 humanists, 4.5 opinions, and an epistemological debate about whether you can have half an opinion. So, but this is work that I've been doing in one way or another, for a long time now, and something that I feel deeply connected to. I want to tell a story to start off. A lot of people ask me, is your name really Fish? Which is a little bit strange because I don't go up to people and ask, like, is your name really David? Which it is. But no, my father, Fortney Hellman Stark III, never used the name Fortney, or at least not for most of his career. So many of you knew him as Pete Stark, the first member of Congress to come out as an atheist. He went by Fortney for a little while when he was around my age, in his late 20s and 30s, until one time he went on television to talk about his business, and an overexcited news anchor introduced him as Bank President Fartney Stork. So that name didn't last long, and then it was many years later was bestowed upon me. For obvious reasons, I wasn't consulted at the time. But I learned really quickly when I got to first grade that a name like Fortney Hellman Stark III was a liability in the first grade. It was a letter or two off from Courtney, which was a girl's name, and I was already like a very feminine little boy with tortoiseshell glasses, always reading a copy of the Babysitter's Club under the table. And so this was just another excuse to drop kick my ass up and down the hallway. And I went around saying, okay, maybe I could be called something different. Fish came from my initials. I turned over, I remember this vividly. It was a dot to dot of Martin Luther King, which is now not allowed in Texas and Florida in public schools. And on the back of the dot to dot, I wrote out my initials, FHS, which looked a little bit like fish. And I said, that's hip, that's cool, that's edgy. I bet a kid named Fish doesn't get bullied. Which was wrong. But I kept the name, and I think some of you know, and I'll talk more about this, in my work before coming to the AHA, I largely worked with young people, with youth. I tell that story a lot, not because I think people should change their names, although we just hired a guy who changed his middle name to Adventure, and I think that's pretty clever. But because I think it communicates an important truth, and a very humanist truth, which is that we live in a world where there are a lot of things that are outside of our control, right? And we've always sought to bring control to our circumstances. That in part is where religion comes from, right? We want to find ways to control the things we can and tell stories about the things we can't. But even as we live in a world where so much is outside of our control, what we can control is ourselves. What we believe, how we define ourselves, and how we show up. In a world where people feel like they have less control than ever before, they need to recognize the control we have within ourselves to self-actualize and self-determine. And I think this is a big part of why people are looking for something right now, and they don't know it's humanism, but that in fact is what it is. I was lucky enough, I not only grew up in a humanist home, where humanist values like truth and honesty and compassion were what we talked about at the dinner table, or what you were talked about, what they talked to you about when you got in trouble. But also, I was lucky enough to be one of the few college students who went to a campus where I had a humanist chaplain. So when I was an undergrad at Yale, we had a guy named Chris Stedman who would host Sunday morning gatherings and Thursday night dinners, and you could just go and talk to as young kids who were buzzing with ambition about what the hell you wanted to do with all of it. And he was a really powerful, he helped me and other people understand a little bit better what we were doing here and what we wanted to do with it all. And that led me, that introspection and that thinking about what my humanist values led me to do, led me to a career in what I call applied humanism, which others might call education. And so I spent years first studying developmental psychology at Yale and then Harvard, and then years using data and research to build programs that helped young people develop self-empowerment, positive mental health, tradition of service. So I spent time in the West Virginia coal fields running a mentorship program with the American Friends Service Committee, and then traveling around the world working with Lady Gaga's foundation and the Red Cross to improve their youth leadership programs when I was working at a nonprofit that trained and funded youth activists. You know, Kiva gives microgrants to people to start goat farms. We gave microgrants to young people to help them start uprisings against autocratic regimes in Nigeria, or to start the first sex ed program in their rural village in Kenya, or to rebuild civil society after the earthquake in Nepal. And from there, I joined a tech startup and that was building apps to promote positive mental health in kids. So imagine Duolingo for positive mental health so that a kid and their parent can do it together every night and build up a stronger self-concept. In all of that work, everywhere I went, I saw the same truth repeated. And that truth is that we are all living in an age of dispossession right now. We all feel a little less powerful. We're working harder for less money. Our paychecks go less far. I know plenty of people who can't afford to buy the house they grew up in, even though they've got the same jobs as their parents, who can't afford to buy any kind of house in the city they grew up in. I know that's true for a lot of people in New York right now. You've got people who have gone from, used to be the average American had something like 10 friends. Now the average American has 3, and plenty of people have no one outside of their family who they see. We live in an increasingly atomized society, and a society where people feel increasingly dispossessed. And what I saw from working with young people is that people are looking for something that they can listen to that will tell them that they're capable of making change in their own life and making change in the lives of others, solving the problems that the world has to offer. And this, of course, has always also been true about humanism. Humanism has always been a philosophy of self-actualization, self-determination. The idea that there is no one else coming to save us. And that also means nothing ever has. So that means we built this. We evolved from fish and built civilization. Humans are incredibly capable, and that not only should give us a sense of responsibility, but it should give us a sense of pride and purpose. So when we talk about why to grow humanism, why does it matter to grow humanism? Because I think we've got to talk about why before we talk about how. The number one reason that I and the team of new folks we brought onto the AHA are passionate about growing humanism right now is because ultimately we have got a deep wellness crisis in America. We have more people than ever before who are reporting epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, social isolation. And what we know is that having a strong value system, having a belief system, an affirmative belief system, whatever it is, helps you feel connected to other people, gives you a sense of self-integrity, helps you feel that you're living in line with your beliefs, helps you understand who you are, and gives you a sense of wellness. Imagine how we felt, any of us in this room, when we realized there was a word for what we were. When we realized our atheism or our skepticism or our humanism was not something that made us weird and alone, but connected us to a community of people, heroes from our history, people like this group right now that you can actually go and have linguine and clams with, right? An intellectual tradition that stretches back centuries and makes you part of something rather than apart from something. So that's reason number one to grow humanism, because it's, the right wing likes to say that, people who aren't religious have worse mental health than people who are, and that's true, but the part they leave out is that people who have a strong identity outside of religion, a strong sense of identity, do just as well as people who have a strong sense of religious identity. In fact, people who have a strong identity as atheists are more mentally healthy than someone who has a weak identity as religious. It's not belief in God that makes you healthier. It's belief in something. It's some positive identity. It's having a community. So that's reason number one, it matters to grow humanism. And the other reason it matters to grow humanism is that we are all safe to meet in this room right now. But there are lots of places. In fact, the majority of the geographic area of this country, there are places where people don't feel safe to gather as humanists, or as atheists, or as skeptics, or as anything non-religious. There's a great professor, Dina Abbott, at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, who's done work about the experiences of rural atheists in America and has shown that they are often going to church and pretending to believe because they fear deeply for their livelihoods, that they could lose their job, for their families, that they could get divorced and lose their kids in a child custody case because the parent that takes the kids to church is assumed to be the more fit parent, and that they even fear violence because the religious hegemony is so strong in those communities. The more we grow the humanist movement, the more we can create safety for the kind of people who don't have the ability to gather like us. And we need to do that more than ever because we recognize, I know we all do, that this country right now is being run by people who would like to make our experience just like the experience of a humanist living in Muskogee County, Oklahoma, right? They would like the culture of intolerance and skepticism and hatred towards atheists that exists in the Bible Belt to become the American culture. And that's part of why we have to organize. And the third reason for why we grow humanism, why does it matter to bring more people in? Because we can't I'm a student of motivational psychology, right? That's what I studied at Harvard. How do we get kids to want to put in real work to school or service projects? And no one can do anything unless we understand why it matters. The other reason to grow humanism is because humanism, as I've said before, has been the intellectual tradition of America's greatest rebels. And at the times in our country where we needed to rebuild civil society, humanists came up with Planned Parenthood. Humanists started the ACLU. Humanists planned and led the March on Washington. Humanists like Frederick Douglass were active in the abolitionist movement. Humanists wrote the Dodd-Frank bill and the Cobra bill that lets you keep your health insurance when you lose your job, and the EMTALA bill that the Biden administration used to sue red states that were trying to say women couldn't get life-saving abortion care. Humanists at every stage of the American story have been guided by our values, have stepped up to fight against autocracy, and that's why we need a big movement. And so here's why we think we can do it. If you look at this I suppose it's the purple line on the chart, this is the growth in the past 20 years of the number of people who are religiously unaffiliated. It's almost doubled. It's gone from 16 to 27.4%, doubled. So what that means is that there are fewer and fewer people who are finding a sense of meaning and purpose and community through religion. Now, is that slowing down? Has that plateaued? We don't know. That's still a large number of people in America, a lot of whom are not actively affiliated with humanism and secular communities. I don't know. Like I said, I came from the tech product space, and normally when you have a product that doubles its growth over a period of time and then levels off, you don't get rid of the product. You figure out what's going on with the marketing. So you've got a whole lot of growth in this group, and what I'll show on the next slide is that growth is relatively stable. It's occurring across generations. So yes, young people like me under 30, I can say that for 4 more months, are most likely to be non-religious. But the group that is growing the fastest in terms of leaving religion, 30 to 49-year-olds, and the group that's growing the second fastest is seniors. So something like this that is stretched across generations, the increasing secularization of America, it's not a fad. It's not concentrated among young people. It's universal, because people are looking for something that's not being offered. Now, the question is, why are those people not identifying actively as part of the secular community? We think part of it can be explained by this graph, which has been a study of the nothing in particulars of the people in this group. You got half the people in this graph who say, I don't believe in God, but you've got a lot of people who say, I don't know whether I believe in God or not. I have doubts, I have questions, I'm not sure. You've got this group of nothing in particulars, right? Many of them are not motivated by anti-theism. They're looking for something stronger and more positive to believe in. I know this is something Nick and I agree on, and that's part of the way American Atheist thinks about their messaging too, is that our movement has sort of capped out at the growth that we can have simply by railing about how bad establishment religion is, rather than providing people something affirmative to believe in. For the trend of organized secularism and organized humanism to follow this growth line, we need to be communicating to people about what there is to believe in, the power of affirmative humanism. And so, why are people leaving religion? Part of it is they stopped believing in the religious teachings. It wasn't a conflict with it. They just said, this doesn't appeal to me anymore, and they stepped back and they're looking for something else. The number 2 reason, and I find this important to point out, negative religious teachings about the treatment of LGBTQ people. So folks have asked me, hey, why did your organization criticize Richard Dawkins for some of the things that he is, the demagoguery and some of the really demeaning things that he has said about transgender people, like the fact that they are in a cult. And this is why. Because ultimately, not only has humanism always believed in the right of people to self-determine, ever since John Stuart Mill said hundreds of years ago that ultimately we need to support experiments in living to protect against the social tyranny of overvaluing tradition. But also because we can read a chart, and young people who are looking for something else are primarily looking because they don't like the way their religion teaches with one hand that we should be compassionate towards all people, and then on the other hand decides to lose all their ideals of compassion when it comes to people who don't follow the very narrow norms of Christian sexual ethics. So why else do we think we have an opportunity to grow? We live in a moment where, as I mentioned, there's a crisis of meaning and community, and I want to cite the data to the letter. Half of young people under 30 report having anxiety or depression. And when we survey those young people, 58% of them say that the primary cause, and this is the number one cause that's reported, is a feeling of lacking meaning or purpose. That's higher than financial worries. It's higher than achievement pressure. It's higher than saying they don't have the skills to get the job they want. Lacking in meaning and purpose. And of course, we've got both the CDC and private insurance companies talking about the increasing trend of loneliness. 20% of American adults meet the criteria for social isolation, but almost 60% of men and women say they feel lonely. We're all spending less time with people, all feeling less connected to institutions and groups than we used to. And we know that people are looking for things to give them an affirmative sense of meaning and purpose. Because in fact, 42% of Americans think, at least on a weekly and some of them on a daily basis, about how do they find more meaning and purpose in their life. And of all the book sales, we all know book sales are going down. We all see Barnes & Noble and Borders closing. The number one type of book sale that is up in this country over the past 10 years, self-help books. So you've got a lot of people who are already looking and saying, well, I don't trust religion to be the guide for my life anymore. I'm looking for something different. I'm wondering about meaning and purpose. Where do I go? And into that void step some of the most socially irresponsible charlatans the world has ever seen. People like Jordan Peterson and Nick Fuentes and Ben Shapiro, who sell primarily lonely, dispirited, purposeless people, but especially young white men. This idea that you can find a sense of power and purpose from imagining yourself on top of a made-up hierarchy, of picking out people who you believe you're better than and feeling a sense of superiority towards them, feeling that being the first-class citizen in America and being able to subject other people is your birthright, is your legacy. The problem is, like any cheap high, that hooks people and then it doesn't last. Maybe that's why they pursue it so vigorously, right? Because they're looking for the power of that initial hit in an ideology that has nothing but emptiness to it. So we think there's an opportunity to offer a counterweight. There's something to the fact that the type of young guy who was listening to Sam Harris 15 years ago is now listening to Ben Shapiro. What brings that guy back? That's part of the question that we're trying to answer. And so as we've been building up the AHA since I started almost exactly 8 months ago, we've been asking this question of what does it mean to make humanism something to belong to and believe in and fight for? Because ultimately those are things that everyone is looking for with the belief systems and communities that they're a part of. So this is, if you're investing in the AHA, this is the kind of work you're supporting. You know, we're focusing a lot more these days on entry-level humanism. How do we, I don't know if anyone has been hearing recently about Stoicism. Anyone been? So I go hang out with my high school friends, and a guy was telling me he reads Marcus Aurelius every morning. Why the hell do you read Marcus, or what? You know, you didn't read when we were in high school. What are you talking about reading Marcus Aurelius? I read Marcus Aurelius when it was a sign. You didn't. So there's a incredible series of content creators, and especially this guy named Ryan Holiday, who has created a brand out of Stoicism, has taken the writings of these ancient Roman emperors and repackaged them for people to learn from that ancient philosophy, which I think is in some ways compatible with humanism, although the two are not perfect overlaps. People are they're not looking to things that are made up. They want to understand something that actually has a tradition to it as wisdom from the past, as a source to guide their lives. It's our responsibility to do for humanism what people like Ryan Holiday have done for Stoicism, to articulate it in a clear way that people can understand and use it as something to give them purpose and guide their lives. So what are we doing? We're building daily texts. You can get them on your phone. They're free. You can sign up on the American Humanist website, and you get texts every day with quotes from humanist leaders, everyone from Carl Sagan to Gloria Steinem, to essentially it's an analog to a Christian devotional, right? A short way to start your day with humanism and think about how you want to carry humanism forward. We built an online parenting community because one of the things that is bringing people back fastest to religion around my age, millennials, is having kids. Everyone wants their kid not to be an asshole, and a lot of the way people learn that as children is they got dragged to church, or they got dragged to synagogue, or they got dragged to the mosque, and without an alternative, they're going to go back to what their parents did. So we've been working, and we've got over 1,000 parents in this parenting community in just a few months to offer an alternative and say to people, hey, if you want a guidebook and a community for raising your kids that doesn't involve God, we've got that for you. And we'll soon be launching a foray into the world of the new media the young people consume. Who's on TikTok? Who has kids or grandkids who are on TikTok and has heard about TikTok? People are getting their news increasingly through TikTok and podcasts as a media source, and ultimately those are the mediums through which Stoicism was popularized. We've got to find our way back into those spaces and make a clear and powerful case, not just for humanism, but as a counterweight against these excesses that we're seeing on the far right, that are giving people something to believe in, that are giving people a narrative that makes them feel powerful when they go to those apps looking for meaning and purpose. And we're very lucky we brought in an incredible new lead on our communications team to do this work. John, I know you'll know this name, people who follow national politics. There's a guy named Ben Wickler who transformed the Democratic Party in Wisconsin, won huge victories in 2018 and 2020, became a national media figure and was almost DNC chair. We brought in his communications director as someone who will help humanists and humanism learn to communicate with the discipline and rigor of a political campaign, but also work those new media tools that, and don't worry, the magazine isn't going anywhere. Work the new media tools that will help us reach out to these new audiences. Something to belong to. We're growing the AHA. The AHA has been growing tremendously over the past year. Donations are up about 80%, thanks to those of you who have been supporting and contributing. And we're growing our membership as well, and in part that's through targeted outreach to groups who we know overlap with humanism, like Unitarian Universalists and effective altruists and the LGBTQ community. We're also increasing our local group staffing by 150% because we want more resources to help folks in this room who lead local groups get the tools and the coaching and the training they need to bring more people in, because ultimately people don't just want to have an idea, they want what they believe to connect them to a community. So if you haven't heard from Jake yet, we brought in an amazing person who has experience in the YMCA movement, knows how to grow groups strongly and systematically. We've launched a digital community that's open to all AHA members. We'd like it to be the biggest one since our atheism. And it's a place on Discord, if any of you have used that app, where people can come together using their real name or anonymously to talk about whether it's humanist philosophy, humanist and church-state separation politics, enlightenment scholars, or share recipes and photos. And we're going back to doing our in-person conferences, and we're going to be focusing on the humanist tradition of what are the ideas for America's future. If the 20th century humanist ideas were things like Bill Nye and Carl Sagan's popular science, or Jonas Salk's polio vaccine, or Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood, what new ideas are humanists going to contribute to the 21st century? So we hope you'll join us in Chicago the last weekend of June. I'll say, having just come from the incredible conference Nick and his team ran in Minneapolis, there's nothing like a conference full of secular and humanist folks, especially right now when we are all feeling very, very sidelined and attacked within our own country, to come together with people who believe what we believe is powerful. And we're going to have some incredible debates, presentations from the main stage about the humanist ideas we think will change, whether it's the future of how we measure human progress or the future of how we think about human relationships in a world where the internet has disintegrated gender norms and dating practices. Or even thinking about what's next for democracy. What does it mean to rebuild and renew American democracy in a way that's better than it was before as it withstands an attack? And finally, we're trying to build something to fight for. We're rebuilding the Appignani Humanist Legal Center. Those of you who know Compassion and Choices, which fights for the right to assisted dying and they fight the Christian nationalist right in 50 states to protect people's right to choose how to end their own lives. We brought a great senior attorney from Compassionate Choices to be our legal director, and we are expanding our litigation to protect the rights of humanists and atheists to have exactly the same status and privileges and freedoms that anyone else in this country does. We just sued the state of West Virginia in partnership with the ACLU to defend this nonsense provision where they spent $5 million from the water fund. And I've lived in West Virginia. The water runs brown out of the taps even in the capital city. To an out-of-state Catholic college that only grants degrees in Catholic studies. We sued West Virginia to get that money back, not just for humanists, but for every taxpayer who doesn't want their money wasted on religious nonsense. We have a goal of doubling the size of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which we helped Jamie Raskin and Jared Huffman start back in 2018, and the caucus is growing faster than it ever has in its history. In fact, just since the beginning of Trump's second term, we've had 6 new members of Congress sign up and join the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, including Congresswoman Judy Chu of California on Friday, and we've gone from having 1 openly non-religious member of Congress, Jared Huffman, to 3 now, Emily Randall from Washington and Yasmin Ansari from Arizona. That's the work that our incredible lobbying team has done, that you have helped support. We've been expanding into state advocacy, and again, I want to acknowledge that's because American atheists proved that that was a really effective way for secular people to organize, not by tilting at windmills on the national level and waving signs in front of the Supreme Court, but by actually going and saying, hey, wait a minute, the radical religious right is using the states as their laboratory, let's interfere with them and shut them down, and let's, in blue states, make sure that we are pushing forward a positive vision for what secular policy looks like. So we've been introducing bills in multiple states this session to strip away the special privileges that religious healthcare sharing ministries have. They act like health insurance. They're not health insurance. And I especially want to recognize Assemblymember Weprin in New York, who himself is a religious person, but who we partner with. We believe in partnering with progressive religious folks to introduce this bill to say, hey, it's not okay to deceptively market your fake health insurance like real health insurance, and you don't get to do it just because you call yourself religious. And of course, we're shining a spotlight on the hypocrisy of this administration. That's why we reintroduced the Reason Day proclamation with Jamie Raskin and Jared Huffman yesterday in the House. Now, is that going to pass? It has ever since my dad introduced the first one in 2011. They haven't been passing them, but it's an important thing to do, not just to organize and fight in the state legislatures and bring lawsuits and do mutual aid work. It's important to make fun of the nonsense that they're putting out there. Because as Jefferson said, ridicule is the best weapon that can be used against unintelligible propositions. Voltaire believed that too. So, ultimately, here's what I believe. I think right now the humanist movement is an opportunity to do what it's done for centuries and move America forward to a place of stronger, fairer, better protections for all people. That's what humanists like Frederick Douglass did in the abolition movement. It's what humanists like A. Philip Randolph did during the civil rights movement. It's what humanists like Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem did during the women's lib movement. And the reason I know we can win is if we're willing to win working in partnership with others. If we're willing to say our place in the progressive coalition is to do 2 important things. Number 1, it is to, in partnership with our other secular partners, raise the salience of the attacks Donald Trump is trying to make on the separation of church and state, which are unpopular with Americans. 78% of Americans think this Commission on Anti-Christian Bias is nonsense. And 78% of Americans includes a majority of Christians, because they know that this is just signaling and it's going to infringe on religious liberty. We're the moral majority on that question. And Americans believe generally in the separation of church and state. In Kentucky, they voted down laws to send more public tax dollars to voucher programs in unaccountable private religious schools. We're the moral majority on that question too, of whether tax dollars should fund public schools. So the one thing we can do is raise that salience of all the nonsense things they're trying to do to undermine them with all the working Americans who mostly care about the price of eggs. And the number 2 thing that we can do as humanists is build that positive identity, that system of belief for the tens of millions of progressive and non-theistic people who are lonelier and feel less empowered and feel less connected than ever. Because when people feel like they have something to believe in, when people feel connected to others, that is when they do their best work. That is when they have the power to resist this slide into authoritarianism that we're a part of. And the reason I think it can happen is because, look, if you divide America into the people who believe in God and who don't, yes, we are a minority. But if you divide America differently, if you think of America, if you think of what's going on right now as a conflict between the people who believe in religious freedom and don't, then we're the moral majority. A floor of 80% of people believe church-state separation is a core American value and part of the Constitution. If you divide America into people who believe that you need religion to be a good person and people who don't, we're the moral majority. 2/3 of people believe that religion is a personal choice. Whether you believe in a God or not doesn't make you a good person. Even a majority of religious people believe that. We are the moral majority if you ask about respect for science. We're the moral majority if you ask about respect for democracy. We're the moral majority if you ask whether people would rather have a humane government that takes care of seniors and the poor, or a Doge government that cuts grandma's Social Security checks further and further to fund Elon Musk. And the only reason our moral majority is not in power right now is because of this unholy alliance between the bishops and the billionaires, who have brought out fervent busloads of evangelical voters and funded it with massive, unaccountable checks that are allowable under Citizens United, because they've realized that if they work together, they can get the social closed-mindedness that the bishops want and the massive tax breaks that the billionaires want. But it's not what Americans want. It's not what we want. It's not what people who are progressive people of faith want. And so there's an opportunity for us not to dilute what we believe, but to bring together more people around what we've always believed and connect with people who think somewhat differently and do a lot more. And I'll close by saying this. I think that one of the most powerful things that hacks like Peterson and Shapiro offer their listeners is this feeling that you are part of a heritage and part of a tradition. And so one of the things we're doing more at the AHA that I want to encourage all of us to be thinking about doing is we're talking more about humanist heritage. That's a word we borrowed actually from our partners at Humanist UK, which are growing a lot bigger than us. We've got to tell the stories of the fact that at all of these moments in America's history, when we got freer and fairer, humanists were there. Whether it's Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson giving the new nation the courage to cast off a king because they believed in self-government, and then enshrining into the Constitution, making us the first nation ever to have constitutional religious freedom, because they knew that part of what made Europe so oppressive and autocratic was state religion. To Frederick Douglass, who demanded that our country live up to the words Thomas Jefferson wrote but never followed himself, that all people were created equal. To the folks in the 1900s like A. Philip Randolph and Harvey Milk and Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, who powered the movements that made people of color and women and gay people freer in America. To people like Jonas Salk, who invented the polio vaccine, and Steve Wozniak, who brought us the Apple computer, and Kurt Vonnegut, and Kristen Bell, and Mark Twain, and people who have pushed the boundaries of art. Humanists have moved America because we've always thought on the boundaries of the possible. We don't let ourselves be restricted by tradition or myth. We are guided by what is true and what will help the most people, and we are willing to radically reimagine things that can be done. That's something a lot of people want to hear right now. That tradition, that legacy of incredible American leaders is something that people would like to see themselves in. And they can, and they will join us if that's the story we tell them. And so I hope you guys can see a little bit, the AHA has been doing some things differently, talking differently towards the goal of growing this humanist movement and inviting more of those 45 million sleeping humanists in. This is why we feel it matters. It's what we feel people need to hear, and it's what we're doing. So I'll close by saying this, and I'll take questions for as much time as we have. We need your help. The writer Anne Lamott says there are only 2 prayers, really, when you get down to it. It's thank you, thank you, thank you, and help me, help me, help me. And I'm not a praying person in the divine sense, but I'll issue a secular prayer to you all, which is thank you and help us. You all have invested into our work, and you've let us hire an incredibly strong team of people who are putting these new programs into place and delivering with speed. But there's a recession coming. We know that. We rely on a vast majority of our donors are giving under $50, right? They're working people who are giving to us out of their Social Security checks or out of their paycheck. They are not people who are going to keep funding us if eggs go up to $9 a gallon or they can't get a job because of the Trump tariffs. If you have the ability to give more, give more. If you're not a member of the AHA, consider becoming one. You can be both a member of the AHA and any of the groups here in New York. We're just like American Atheists, we don't charge dues or fees to our local groups. So you can support us both. And if you support the AHA, you'll get, thank you, Brian, for saying it's a lovely magazine, but you'll support the great work that's happening on Capitol Hill. Ultimately, we are, I think, heading in an exciting direction as a secular movement. There is an opportunity to bring in people and bring them together to fight what almost every American recognizes as an overreach. But we can only do it with resources. And that's why I'm spending a lot of my time on the road talking to groups like this. You know, Frederick Douglass said, and this is one of my favorite quotes, that in the struggle for justice, the only reward is the opportunity to be in the struggle. So I know we're all making our own decisions about how we show up for a time like this. My decision has been made, as we like to say at the AHA. As for me and my house, we will serve humanity. Thank you all so much. All right. Questions from folks? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Fish, I really liked everything you said. And when it comes to the breakdown of the wall, separation of church and state, I think we all can see that it's under threat and that maybe the majority of people agree with us, but the Supreme Court does not.
Right.
So there's something called the Establishment Clause, which used to mean you could not favor religion. Now it means you have to treat non-religion and religion equally. Right? This is a completely new interpretation of the same old words.
Right.
And how do you plan to deal with that? That's my question.
It's a good question. I think, honestly, the way that you deal with the Establishment Clause is we've got to get a new Supreme Court. Like, we are moving away from Establishment Clause litigation because we are worried that really terrible precedent will be set whenever a case like that comes before the Supreme Court. Our focus right now is on civil rights litigation. So making sure that you can't discriminate against humanists and atheists, which happens all the time in hiring and in housing and in immigration law and in child custody law. And I think ultimately, you know, we have to realize where the limitations are. This Supreme Court would make the Pope president if the Pope came to America and asked to be president, I think. And so we've got to recognize the limitations we're in. We've got to use civil rights cases, I think, to polarize Americans in the direction we want on religious freedom issues. Because there are a lot of people in America who say, I believe in religious freedom, but, you know, prayer in public school, maybe that's not so bad. It's, you know, could be good for kids to pray.
Or the 10 Commandments on the wall.
Or the 10 Commandments, because they're like, yeah, honor your father and mother. I don't get enough of that at home. But if you polarize it around the lines of, should John in West Virginia be able to get fired from his job as a mechanic at the Valvoline because he's an atheist? Most people would say, no, you shouldn't fire somebody for that. That's nasty. That's silly. And they wouldn't trust a government or a court of law that allowed them to. And by the way, this is a live wire because you've got U.S. senators talking about firing school teachers for being atheists. You have Mark Wayne Mullen from Oklahoma saying, we are going to try and fire atheist teachers because the purpose of public school teachers is to teach the Bible, and you can't teach it if you don't believe in it. So that's where we're focusing our legal work, to try and polarize the issue, win a durable majority, and make sure that next time they put justice before, an appointed justice before the Senate, they're getting grilled on whether they support church-state separation, and it's a non-starter to appoint people who are going to vote like people have been voting now. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You're making me angry.
Tell me.
Because as a past president of the New York City Skeptics and a member of Center for Inquiry, I've been trying to get these guys politically active for years. And it's the argument is we're not about politics, and this time is not an average time. This is not Bush v. Gore. This is not Bush v. Clinton. This is something different. And we have to stand up. We have to get politically involved. I think you're doing great work. You can count on my support. I will, absolutely help you in any way I can. That's really fantastic.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. And I'll say this. Here's what we need to do. We don't, we have lobbyists, and American Atheist has lobbyists, and the Center for Inquiry has a lobbyist, and so forth, working on Capitol Hill. We probably have, all of us combined, 1/20th of the number of lobbyists the Heritage Foundation alone does. And so we have got a lot of work to do. And here's the real challenge we need to combat, right? I can't talk too much about it, but I'm allowed to tell you that the AHA, through our C4, has a PAC, a political action committee, and it takes donations and then it gives them to people who are running for office who are atheist, agnostic, or humanist, or people who are religious but strongly support church-state separation. People like Jamie Raskin, who is Jewish but is also a very strong supporter of free thought. And so the problem is that, that PAC only gets about $75,000 a year, even though secular people are 30% of America and they're some of the most likely to donate to political campaigns. There are two communities that have built their political power by realizing this key fact in the past. So far, it is the LGBTQ community through the LGBTQ Victory Fund and similar groups, and the Jewish community. My fiance used to work at J Street, right? There are a lot of people in the Jewish community who do their political giving through Jewish PACs and Jewish organizations. The money goes to the same people they would have otherwise supported. But then people know, oh, this came from the Jewish community. And when the guy from APAC or the guy from J Street comes and knocks on my door, I need to say, oh, come on in, have a seat. What can I do for you today? So that's one of the things we've got to figure out as a movement. How do we get better at making sure our political, the donation that you might give to Kamala Harris or Chuck Schumer or AOC or what have you, you're considering giving some of those donations through humanist and secular vehicles. That's going to be a big part of our work because, frankly, money talks in politics, and that's the next step for how we build power. What's that?
We need $1 billion.
Oh.
The Koch brothers have been funding this for 60 years. And as well as many other billionaires.
Well, we need people. We need people at all levels to give, and that's part of the great thing about us having, tens of thousands of donors who are giving less than $50 on average. Is if the billionaire calls me and says, "Hey, you have to do so and so, or I'm not going to give you money anymore," I can say, "Hey, forget it, man." Right? Because we've got a large pool of people who are going to stay with us as long as we stay true to our values. But I wouldn't say no. If anyone's got a business card of a billionaire, I would take it, and I would set up a meeting. Nick and I have been saying we got to figure out somebody like a George Soros type who will put $1 billion into secular organizing. He'll take a third. I'll take a third. Secular Student Alliance will take a third. Anyway, yes, I agree with you. There's a lot more we can do, and I'm grateful for your support.
When you started out your presentation with your elevator pitch, I think the second slide said, compassion tells us what is right, and science tells us what is true. Something like that.
Yeah.
Right now, it's become apparent in the last week or so, the Christian nationalists and the pro-authoritarians are having a war on science. They are cutting the funding for a lot of science in this country. Climate change science, health science. I just think we need to highlight that we are on that side of the issue.
They're having a war on science, and they're trying to start a war on empathy. Right? You got Elon Musk and everyone from Elon Musk to right-wing Catholics to J.D. Vance saying empathy is suicidal. Now, again, I've worked in child mental health. I think I know a thing or two about what makes people suicidal. It's not empathy. Empathy is, in fact, correlated with positive mental health, with pro-social behavior, with stronger feelings of self-control, and also it, happens to be correlated with not being a giant asshole. For me, I can see why when they're trying, ultimately, when their political program relies on them doing things that obscure the truth and that require people to push down their instincts of disgust that we feel when cruelty is visited upon other people, Those are the only reasons you would attack science. When you don't like what the truth is going to tell you, because you have your own truth in mind, you want the truth to be what the president says it is and the law to be what the president says it is. And of course they're going to attack empathy because they can't force their regressive religious norms on people. They can't enact their mass deportation program. They can't gut social programs without triggering people to do the most human thing possible, which is to be repulsed by other people's cruelty and compassionate towards other people's suffering. So they've done in what, in my opinion, is a very stupid thing. They have made it now a revolutionary act to be empathetic. They have said that one of the most basic human capacities is a rebellion against their program. That's great. We'll run with that all day long. So we're going to be, we've got some plans in the works to be talking more about empathy and pushing back on that big idea, but we also are going to be working, especially this summer, to mobilize the scientific community within the humanist movement, to talk about the importance of science and push back on this narrative that we've got to, and by the way, this is something where the secular community hasn't figured out its own alignment, but I think we need to push back on the idea that we should defund science, period. I think we should push back on the idea that we had to defund science because it is quote unquote too woke. I know plenty of scientists. I know that that's a belief that was, that is not broadly shared in the scientific community, but that in fact things like, helping, low-income young women get special training so that they have the same opportunity as anyone else to take a science career are good for the scientific community, not bad for it. So we're going to be beating that drum as hard as we can. Yes, sir.
When you were going through a list of the projects you're involved in now, did I hear you correct to say one of them is rebuilding the SHSny legal center? And I thought, did something happen to it?
No, that's a good. I should say what I mean by rebuilding. We went through a staff and a strategy transition. So I want to be honest about the fact that we haven't had a legal director in a couple of years. We do have one now, and a great one. And also the kinds of cases that we were taking back in 2019 are not going to be the kinds of cases that we take now. I can tell you, the work that it's done over the years has put us in tremendously good shape. So just to give you an example, we had that great lawsuit we just launched against West Virginia, but we also just last year won a verdict from a Bush-appointed judge in our lawsuit against the city of Ocala, Florida. They said it's fine for us to use public funds and public resources to put on a city-run prayer vigil. And we said, no, it's not. That's not what the Constitution says. And the Bush-appointed federal judge agreed with us. We won a very clear verdict saying what they did was wrong. And that was a case that had been in the works for almost 10 years, right? We've been planting seeds that are just coming to fruition now through that incredible legal work that I know a lot of people in New York helped support. And now we're figuring out the next version of it to respond, as we talked about, to this very different environment for church-state separation litigation. Any other, Brian, I got no idea how much time we have.
If you appealed them, they'd be in trouble.
We're probably running out of time.
I just want to point out, you forgot the original humanist, the original dead white male, Socrates.
True.
We are older than Christianity.
I like that. I like the idea of talking about the ancient Greeks who were humanists. Clearly, there's a strong parallel for that in the Stoicism movement.
I can go back even further.
David, take us back.
Margaret Mead said, what makes us human was not our technology, but finding fossils of somebody some individual who is hurt and damaged and who would not have lived affect other people and not, care. That's right. You're way before, quote unquote, civilization.
Humanism among the early primates. I love it.
And that's not weakness. They survived.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
Well, listen. Oh, I'm sorry, Dad. No, good job. I'll close with this because I know that we need to give people a little more time to eat. We need to wrap up and let the folks at Tony's have the room. Please reach out anytime. Ultimately, if you guys are members of the AHA, I work for you. The board is a proxy for our membership, but you're the ones who pay our team salaries, invest in our incredible work. I want to hear what you think. I want to hear what you're encouraged by and what you want to see us do more of. I want to hear where we can do better and what you're critical of. I especially want to hear, whether it's money or volunteer time or connections to interesting people and billionaires, what you think you can contribute. Because the truth is, We right now are up against what I think is the greatest threat to secularism in American history. We have an administration that has very clearly put a stake in the ground. You got Donald Trump saying he wants to bring religion back to America. Now, somebody who says he wants to bring religion back to America but calls Doug Emhoff a crappy Jew and calls Marion Buddy a very bad bishop who gave a very boring talk when they criticize him, he doesn't want to bring religion back to America, right? He wants more, he wants the type of fundamentalist evangelical Christianity that supports him to have full government support and favor, which is a much more dangerous type of religious nationalism than the Bush era, oh, wouldn't it be better if more people prayed a lot, whatever religion they were. So we've got a lot of work to do. It's going to take more investment than us than it has in a long time, but ultimately we've got a lot of things that make us excited. Our history has shown that humanists respond to moments like this effectively. This present moment, I know Nick is seeing it too. We're seeing it with donations to the AHA being up, membership. Way more people are signing up for our conference this year than had for the last 2 years ago. Membership is up. People are stepping up to make a positive difference. And I see the future when I talk with young humanists. Part of what we're using member contributions for is we're going to have 4 full-time paid interns at our office in DC this summer through a partnership with the Secular Student Alliance. We had dozens and dozens of college kids apply to these internships, and when they wrote about why humanism mattered to them, why they wanted to work in the humanist movement, that was what made me believe, okay, the kids are all right, they are going to be big humanists, and we are not going anywhere for a long time. So thank you. With your help, we'll get there.